everybody, Zach again, Torah.com, coming in, making a video for you today. So, I can't believe the amount of blog posts, videos, podcasts, all kinds of these articles people are resources people are sending me this year from all these places that are defending Christmas because they are feeling the attacks more so than I have ever seen. And there are so many places out there, personalities within Christianity who are trying to defend Christmas, save Christmas. And it's because so many people are realizing that Christmas and Easter are just rooted in pagan fertility celebrations, ancient pagan fertility celebrations. And the amount of scholars out there today that uphold this view is astronomical. And anyone who stands up trying to save Christmas or Easter now at this point is just made a laughingstock because it's so one-sided. But some of these people, their theology stands on this being correct because they've been preaching from this forever and ever and ever, and they have to defend it. And it's just a laughable, defense. When you go back and you do your research, the fir tree, the pine cone, the bunny rabbit, the egg have all been used by pagan civilizations and cultures dating back all the way to ancient Egypt as symbols of fertility and to worship the sun god at the winter solstice when the sun is the lowest in the sky. Everything is dead, but yet that fir tree, that evergreen tree, is still alive. And people use inanimate objects like the egg because an inanimate object where there is no life or seems to be no life, all of a sudden, there's life. These are symbols of fertility, always have been. And so there was an article that came out, and a lot of you guys have been sending me all these things, and I'm like, I can't respond to all of them. But thank you for sending those. Some of them are really interesting, and this one is also, and that's why I'm responding to it today. There was an article that was put out by a guy named Shane Schatzel. I'm not sure what his name is pronounced, but he was over at Gab, and a lot of you guys have asked me to join Gab. I have not joined it, or maybe I did, but I'm not active over there. But his article defending Christmas was then shared by the CEO of Gab, and it caused a lot of controversy, and a lot of you guys sent me this article in my email, in my inbox. And so I'm going to read you a quote from this article. What all these individual attacks really amount to is Judaizing. I submit to you that the modern church, much like the early church, has a significant problem with Judaizing. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what is Judaizing? What is this? Well, actually, it only appears once in your Bible and not even probably in your translation. It only appears in what's called the Young Living Translation that I'm aware of. And it's one time in one verse, the word Judaize. And I believe it's in Galatians chapter 2, verse 14. We'll get to there in a second. But his definition of Judaizing is given in the article. Let's read that. The biblical definition of a Judaizer is a Christian who attempts to bind other Christians to the Old Testament Mosaic Law. Okay? See, he's saying that by going back and doing the feast days and doing the dietary laws and doing the Sabbath, this is Judaizing. You're going back to the old Mosaic Law. This was nailed to the cross. This is a burden. In fact, I think he calls it a burden in the article. Why would you put people back under that burden? Not to mention the feast days, it says about the feast days in Leviticus 23, they're still keeping the feast days in the New Testament. They're still keeping Passover. They're still keeping Pentecost or Shavuot. They're still keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. They're still keeping Yom Kippur. These are documented in the New Testament. They're not keeping Christmas in the New Testament. See, as a Christian, I was like, really? They're not doing Christmas? When I first looked that up, I'm like, where is Christmas in the New Testament? It's not here. Even after the resurrection, there's nobody keeping Christmas. They're still keeping the feast days in Leviticus 23, and it says in Leviticus 23 4 times to keep these feasts forever throughout all of your generations. Throughout forever. 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 What part of forever do we not understand? Forever. The Sabbath is listed in the Ten Commandments, but they don't mention that. All the other commandments you can do, but the fourth commandment, no, let's just sidestep that one. We don't need, that's nailed to the cross. And if you keep it, you're a Judaizer. And the dietary laws, not to mention that every time pork is mentioned in your Bible, every single time it's mentioned in the negative context. There's a good clue. But if you do these things, you're a Judaizer. But do you understand what he's saying? He's saying if you're doing these, you're putting a burden on yourself. You're putting a burden on others. You're putting a yoke on yourself that you cannot bear. Do you understand what that's saying? So you're saying that when Moses came by God, sent by God to release the Israelites from Egypt, he says, I'm coming to release you from your burden, only to put you under another burden? Let's read the verse. Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptian, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. So I'm taking you out of bondage only to put you back into bondage.
That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. Because in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, it says this, Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And so Christians will say, well, see right there, the law had them under bondage. The law has them under bondage, and Christ made us free from that law, free from that bondage. No. See, you've mistaken what a Judaizer is. Let's go back to Shane's definition of a Judaizer. The biblical definition of a Judaizer is a Christian who attempts to bind other Christians to the Old Testament Mosaic Law. Sorry, Shane, you had this wrong. What a Judaizer was in the New Testament, or the one time it's mentioned in the New Testament in Galatians chapter 2, verse 14, if you have the Young Living Translation, is talking about someone who puts someone under man's law. The law of the Jews, man's law, because man's law was bondage. May I refer you back to Mark chapter 7, verse 7. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. So what were they laying aside? They were laying aside the commandment of God to follow after the tradition of men. The tradition of man is a bondage. The tradition of God, the commandments of God, are liberty. Those are freedom. Moses says, go forth and proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. He doesn't say, go forth and proclaim bondage to all the inhabitants. You now have chains on yourself, and one day someone's going to come, get nailed to a cross, and then you'll be free. He doesn't say that. No, liberty was from the Torah. In fact, every time you look at the Torah mentioned all throughout the Psalms and the Proverbs,
the psalmist,
it says the Torah is perfect. It says the Torah is truth. It says the Torah, the law, is light. See, the word Torah means law. So every time you see the word, you can go do your own word search and find Torah, law, throughout your Bible and see what the Old Testament says about the law. See, the law was good. The law was perfect. The law was light. The law was the way. This is how the Old Testament describes the law. But see, what happened was man came and put a bunch of his laws in place of God's law. They became the traditions and doctrines of man. And that's what is being talked about in the New Testament by Paul. Paul's saying, hey, listen, these guys who are over here telling you to get circumcised before you can be saved, the Torah never says that. See, the Torah over and over again, more often than the flesh, speaks of the heart. If your heart's not saved, what you do with your flesh means nothing. So you can go ahead and get yourself circumcised if you want, but that doesn't make you saved. That's all Paul's saying. And Christianity has interpreted this. People like Shane have interpreted this as saying, well, I don't have to do that then. Because I don't have to do that. That doesn't matter. I don't have to do any of the law. The law is all done away with, nailed to the cross. I can live however I want, and I'm saved. Because it doesn't matter. No. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul's saying, if you're using this as a prerequisite for salvation, you're wrong. You can't do it that way because the heart has to come first. Once the heart is saved, the flesh will then follow. I don't follow the law to be saved. I'm saved already. I follow the law because I'm saved already. I'm grateful for that salvation because it was in my sins that I was going to die. And now that I have repented of my sins, what is sin? Sin is transgression of the law. I will not transgress the law anymore because I'm saved. Does that make sense? So the Judaizers being talked about often by Christianity, mentioned only once in your Bible, if you have a Young Living Translation, are not people who are trying to put people back under the Mosaic Law. These were people who are trying to put you back under man's law. Do you know that for keeping the Sabbath in Judaism, there's over 13, last I looked, it was like 1,300 laws to keep the Sabbath. But the reality is when you read it in the Torah, when you read it in the Bible, the only commandments that God gives you for the Sabbath is don't work, don't make anybody else work, and rest. 3 things. That's pretty simple. That sounds like liberty to me. That sounds easy. That sounds like a yoke that is light, that is easy, like what Yeshua said. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. See, it's easy. There's a yoke, there's a burden, but it's easy and light. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. All right, we'll leave it at that. Go home, read your Bible. Thanks.